Have you ever had that moment in the middle of the day where you just happen to glance at the clock and you see that the hands have finally hit exactly 12 noon?
Oh, yeah, every single day.
Right. And almost instantly, I mean, literally as if on cue, your stomach just starts to rumble.
Like clockwork.
Literally like clockwork. Or maybe it's 6 o'clock in the evening, and even though you haven't really moved from your desk all day, like you haven't burned a single calorie, you find yourself wandering into the kitchen.
Opening the fridge.
Opening the fridge, exactly. And just thinking, well, it's time to eat. And look, if you do this, you are not alone in this. We all do it.
We really do.
We structure our entire waking lives around this deeply ingrained rhythm, right? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But today, we're going on a mission to completely deconstruct that exact paradigm.
Which is going to be fun.
It is,
Yeah.
because we are going to ask a really fundamental question. Should we ditch the rigid structure of 3 square meals a day entirely and, I don't know, finally embrace culinary spontaneity?
I mean, it is a phenomenal question to ask, primarily because that midday stomach rumble feels so undeniably physical.
Yeah, it feels real.
It feels completely real. When you look at the clock and feel hungry, you just assume your body is running on empty, like a car's fuel gauge hitting the red line.
Yeah, exactly.
But endocrinologically speaking, that is rarely what's actually happening. Your body releases this hunger hormone called ghrelin. And the fascinating thing about ghrelin is that it basically operates through Pavlovian conditioning.
Wait, like the dogs with the bells?
Exactly like the dogs with the bells.
Yeah.
Your brain learns your daily schedule. So if you eat at noon every single day, your brain anticipates that routine and actually spikes your ghrelin levels at like 11:45 a.m.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, essentially setting off an internal alarm clock. You aren't necessarily depleted of energy, right?
Huh.
Your body is just bracing for the food it has been trained to expect at that specific hour.
So my stomach is literally just following a software script running in the background, just like pinging me with an alert purely based on the time, completely regardless of my actual battery level. That totally shifts how I view my own appetite.
It's wild, isn't it?
It really is. And to guide us through unpacking this today, we are drawing on a really fascinating mix of modern cultural analysis, nutritional psychology, and a surprisingly relevant book from way back in 1942.
Such a good book, too.
It is. It's by the legendary American food writer M.F.K. Fisher, and it's titled How to Cook a Wolf. And Fisher's wartime perspective, combined with some really sharp modern research, is going to be our roadmap for this depth dive today.
And it's a great roadmap.
Yeah. And to help me and you listening navigate all of this, I'm thrilled to be joined by our resident expert.
Glad to be here. This topic touches literally everyone's daily routine. And understanding the history behind why your ghrelin spikes when it does is going to completely upend how you think about your next meal.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the history of our eating schedule. Because if our bodies are just running a conditioned script, who originally wrote the code? Because I've always assumed that the 3-meal day was, I don't know, an evolutionary hangover from our hunter-gatherer days, or at least deeply tied to our agrarian past.
Yeah, that is a very common assumption. But the historical record tells a completely different story.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Before the modern era, meal timings were incredibly fluid. Think about it. In an agrarian society, you ate based on sunlight, the seasons, and just the specific chores of the day.
So whatever needed to get done dictated the food.
Exactly. A farmer might eat something really hearty at dawn before working the fields, or maybe they'd work first and eat later. The meals themselves were made up of vastly different foods depending on what was available.
Right, whatever was in season.
Yeah. And the timing of those meals, historians say it kind of slipped around day to day. There was no rigid universal schedule where an entire society sat down at the exact same hour.
Huh. So if the sun and the seasons used to dictate our plates, I'm guessing the extreme rigidity of breakfast, lunch, and dinner required the invention of the clock. Or I guess more specifically, the factory.
Spot on. The Industrial Revolution is the turning point here.
Wow.
The rigid structure of a 3-meal day was absolutely not designed to serve the biological or nutritional needs of our bodies.
Definitely not.
And it certainly wasn't designed to maximize our culinary pleasure. It was created for one specific reason, which was to fit the modern day of industrial labor. The factory schedule completely dictated the eating schedule.
That is just wild to think about. We are essentially treating our, highly complex digestive systems like an assembly line punch clock.
It's the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Just look at how the very definitions of our meals were permanently altered during the 19th century.
How so?
Well, breakfast morphed into this highly functional, very brief window. It was no longer a leisurely start to the day. You had to get some fuel in the tank before the morning shift started, or you simply wouldn't eat until noon.
Right. And lunch was hardly a midday oasis either. I recall reading that this entire structure was solidified long before the concept of the paid break was ever won by labor unions.
Oh yeah, pay breaks didn't exist.
Right. So lunch became something purely utilitarian, just something light but fortifying that a worker had to literally wolf down as quickly as possible.
Just cram it in.
Yeah, cram it in so they could get right back to operating the machines.
Which then leaves dinner. Dinner became the grand finale, essentially. The single sitting that happened only when the workday was entirely finished in the evening and the workers had returned home.
Wow.
Yeah, the labor dictated the schedule, not the human stomach.
I mean, I love that punch clock analogy, but I have to push back just a little bit here.
Sure.
Because even if this rigid structure was birthed by the brutal demands of 19th century factories, surely it must have stuck around because our bodies adapted to it and found it to be biologically optimal, right?
You'd think so, but
I mean, human beings are incredibly resourceful. Why else would we universally maintain this three-meal schedule so rigidly in the modern era if it was nothing more than an outdated factory rule?
if we connect this to the bigger picture, it didn't stick around because it was biologically optimal. It endured because those rigid, synchronized time slots created the absolute perfect landscape for corporate influence.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. Once you have an entire population culturally mandated to sit down and eat at 3 very specific, predictable times a day, you have a captive audience.
Right.
And once you have a captive audience, tycoons and moralists can step in and start molding exactly what goes onto their plates during those specific slots.
Ah, I see. So the factory owners controlled the when, which then opened the door for food tycoons to control the what.
Exactly. And that brings us to the late 19th century and some very recognizable names, specifically John Harvey Kellogg.
Okay, wait. As in cereal aisle Kellogg, the cornflakes empire.
The very same. Kellogg, alongside his fellow members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, was deeply involved in a burgeoning healthy living movement in the United States.
Okay.
They set up these sweeping sanatoriums, most famously in Battle Creek, Michigan, where they promoted extremely specific diets. But their promotion of what we should eat, particularly for that rushed pre-shift breakfast slot.
Right, the fuel up slot.
Yeah, it was steeped in a heavy, uncompromising, moralistic undertone.
Right, because they were fiercely anti-stimulant, weren't they?
Very much so.
They believed that spicy, heavy, or, flavorful foods would excite the passions and lead to sin.
Yes.
So they promoted these incredibly bland breakfasts, like the cereal flakes they invented. And MFK Fisher, in her 1942 book, had this brilliantly brutal description of it. She famously called this type of cereal a pale pabulum made of wheat.
It's such a striking phrase.
Yeah.
And the use of the word pabulum there
Oh, yeah.
is extremely deliberate and biting on Fisher's part.
Actually, let me stop you there, because I realized as I was reading it, I don't actually know the precise definition of a pabulum. It sounds, vaguely medical.
It is. Historically, a pabulum was a medical term for a soft, bland, easily digestible suspension of nutrients.
Oh, gross.
Basically, yeah. Essentially mush that was given to infants or invalids who couldn't handle real food.
Okay, wow.
So by calling the cornerstone of the modern breakfast a pale pabulum, Fisher was essentially pointing out that we were collectively feeding ourselves flavorless baby food.
That is hilarious and so accurate.
And Kellogg's bizarre reasoning was that this unstimulating pabulum would keep people morally pure, docile, and disciplined.
But the moral purity angle was really just half the equation, wasn't it? I mean, the capitalists, the factory owners, they loved this cereal trend, but for a completely different, highly pragmatic reason.
Oh, they absolutely embraced it. The employers loved this lighter, blander breakfast because they held a fundamental belief that hearty, heavy food would pull blood to the stomach and make their workers sluggish. They didn't want them lethargic on the factory floor. They didn't want a workforce that was fully satiated and relaxed. They wanted a workforce that was compliant, awake, and slightly on edge.
Just hungry enough to keep working.
Exactly. So a bowl of pale pabulum served both the religious moralists and the industrial capitalists flawlessly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Are you suggesting that the entire cultural mythos of breakfast being the most important meal of the day was essentially just historical PR?
Basically, yes.
Like a marketing campaign designed to keep factory workers from napping on the job, disguised as nutritional science?
The historical context heavily suggests that our breakfast ideals are deeply inextricably entangled with the productivity demands of employers.
That is mind-blowing.
And what's truly remarkable is how that employer-driven food culture didn't vanish when we moved away from heavy industry. It evolved right alongside us into the modern corporate era.
I can see that entirely. I mean, the transition from the factory floor to the office cubicle didn't change the underlying logic at all.
Not a bit.
You look at the mid-20th century entrepreneurs who invented the ubiquitous prepackaged supermarket sandwich. That single invention birthed a corporate culture where the lunch break was effectively erased all over again.
Oh, the sad desk lunch.
The sad desk lunch. You have modern captains of industry figures like Alan Sugar are specifically noted for this in the research, who actively boast about the fact that their staff's lunch is nothing more than a sandwich slung on their desk while their eyes never leave the computer screen.
Right. The mechanics haven't changed. It is the exact same principle as the 19th century textile worker wolfing down a piece of bread because they aren't getting paid for a break.
Wow.
Only now, instead of being a grim reality of the working class, it's dressed up as elite corporate hustle and hyperproductivity.
That's so true.
The modern sad desk lunch is the direct, unbroken descendant of the industrial workday lunch.
Okay, so we've firmly established that the three-meal schedule is a wholly artificial construct. It was driven by the industrial punch clock, populated by foods pushed by puritanical tycoons, and maintained by corporate productivity demands.
Yeah.
But here is the friction. If we cognitively know all of that is true, why does failing to maintain this schedule feel so emotionally terrible?
Oh, the guilt is real.
Right. Why do we feel a profound sense of guilt when we skip dinner or eat cereal at midnight?
Well, that brings us to the psychological fallout of this paradigm, which is immense. And the irony is that this psychological pressure is peaking at the exact moment when the actual practice of eating 3 meals a day is breaking down.
It really is. The reality on the ground is shifting rapidly.
Exactly. The pandemic lockdowns completely scrambled our daily routines, and demographics are changing with a massive rise in people living alone.
It's true. There was actually a headline in the Times recently that captured this perfectly. It said, "A nation of snackers, Britons no longer eat 3 meals a day."
Oh, totally.
So practically speaking, we are grazing, we are skipping, we are eating at weird hours.
But, and this is the kicker, the ideal of the structured sit-down meal is still fiercely, almost violently defended, particularly when it comes to the concept of the family dinner.
Oh, the sacred family dinner.
Exactly. People argue that the daily orchestrated family dinner is the absolute bedrock of a child's overall physical and mental well-being.
Which, on the surface sounds wonderful. Gathering around a table to connect is a beautiful concept.
It is.
But nutritionist Laura Thomas brings a very grounded material critique to this ideal. She points out that the implicit demands of orchestrating this nightly event, the meal planning, the grocery shopping, the actual cooking, the synchronization of everyone's schedules, the invisible labor of a meme that almost universally falls on the shoulders of women.
Absolutely.
And the burden is exponentially heavier for working-class women who might be coming off a grueling shift themselves.
It's an enormous amount of pressure. And academic Anne Murcott really gets to the heart of what this nightly ritual has come to symbolize. She argues that the modern cooked dinner isn't actually about the nutritional value of the food itself anymore.
Then what is it about?
It has come to represent a typical, even orderly domestic life.
I love that insight. So, the evening meal is fundamentally an analogy for having your life together.
Exactly.
It's almost like the cooked dinner has become a nightly theatrical performance. If you don't manage to put on the play every single night at 6 o'clock with all the right props, the protein, the vegetable, the starch, and recite the right script, you don't just feel like you made a dietary misstep.
No, you feel like a moral failure.
Exactly. Even though, as we just unpacked, the script for this play was literally written by 19th century factory owners trying to optimize loom production.
It's crazy. When you elevate a meal schedule to serve as the ultimate proxy for an orderly life, any deviation becomes an indictment of your character.
Yeah.
There's a very raw, revealing anecdote from the source material about this exact phenomenon that illustrates the emotional toll perfectly. A writer shared their experience during a period of poor mental health, where just the sheer pressure of orchestrating the first meal of the day became utterly paralyzing.
Yeah, that anecdote is so visceral. They described literally cowering in bed, crippled by indecision, basically terrified of the kitchen.
And the root of that terror wasn't a fear of starvation. The author recognized that their anxiety stemmed from the deeply internalized belief that failing to consume a properly balanced breakfast meant they were, in their words, failing at life more generally.
I think an incredible number of people listening can instantly relate to that exact suffocating anxiety. To hear it stated that clearly is validating.
It really is.
All of these prescriptive models we've inherited, whether it's calorie counting or hitting strict meal times, or the moral panic over breakfast being the most important meal they manufacture, genuine shame. You feel time pressured, you feel like you lack the domestic orchestration skills everyone else seems to have,
Right.
and you end up feeling like an absolute failure just because you didn't have the energy to eat a bowl of pale pabulum at 8 a.m.
It is a profound burden. Which brings us to the necessary pivot. How do we dismantle it?
Yes, please.
If this structure is harmful, artificially imposed, and causes immense anxiety, what is the practical alternative for our daily lives?
Well, this is where we circle back to our brilliant 1942 guide, MFK Fisher. She was confronting this exact rigid nutritional dogma over 80 years ago.
Ahead of her time.
So ahead of her time. Remember, she was writing How to Cook a Wolf during the height of wartime food shortages and rationing, a time when the government was heavily prescribing exactly what citizens should eat. And yet, she had some incredibly blunt, rebellious advice.
I love her advice.
She wrote that claiming each of the 3 daily meals must be perfectly balanced is, and I quote, one of the stupidest things.
She was wonderfully uncompromising. Fisher observed human nature and pointed out the obvious. Not everyone needs or even wants 3 meals a day.
Right.
She noted that many people actually function far better on 2 meals, or 1 1/2, or perhaps 5 smaller ones. She entirely discarded the rigid mathematical balance that the Puritans and the nutritionists of her era were relentlessly pushing.
Instead, she advocated for a completely different metric for eating, genuine satisfaction.
Imagine that.
Right. She painted this deeply appealing picture of preparing such good, generous, soul-warming food. She talks about rich casseroles and massive bowls and overflowing platters, that your real sensuous appetite is fully satisfied.
Beautiful.
The logic being, if you actually listen to and satisfy that real human appetite, you won't be left with a superficial conditioned appetite, constantly craving more.
What's fascinating here is how closely Fisher's 1942 culinary philosophy aligns with the contemporary science-backed movement known as intuitive eating.
Oh, yeah. That's huge right now.
It is. Intuitive eating has gained immense traction recently as a direct backlash against the punitive, highly restrictive diet cultures of the past few decades. At its core, intuitive eating requires us to completely dismantle the concept of forbidden or bad foods and to stop categorizing meals by their moral value.
It's about reclaiming the habits that diet culture has heavily demonized, right?
Yeah.
Like snacking.
Yes, but with an important caveat regarding the practicalities of modern life. Because we can't advocate for pure culinary spontaneity without acknowledging the material reality of the kitchen.
Right. Someone has to actually make the food.
Exactly. Food work. The physical labor of inventorying the fridge, chopping the onions, cooking the meal, and scrubbing the pots is still unevenly distributed along gendered lines in most households.
That is a crucial point. Any new theory of eating has to acknowledge the reality of who is actually standing at the stove.
Yeah.
If your version of culinary spontaneity just means you suddenly demand that your partner spontaneously cook a feast for you at 10 p.m., that's not a liberation. That's just shifting the burden.
Precisely. A philosophy that ignores the physical constraints of food preparation is useless. So taking into account those very real constraints, the lack of time, the exhaustion, the gendered labor food writer Laura Goodman proposes the ultimate, highly practical solution, and it's wonderfully simple. The snack.
The snack.
The snack.
The very thing we've been scolded out since childhood, warned that it will ruin our appetite, is actually the hero of the story.
It truly is. If you look at the broad sweep of human history, snacking was exactly how we sustained ourselves before the industrial workday took over and formalized everything into rigid blocks. We were grazers.
So a genuinely good snack isn't a failure of self-control. It's a return to our pre-industrial biological roots.
Exactly.
Goodman makes the case that a thoughtful, delicious snack has the power to dispel that immense theatrical pressure of the nightly family dinner. It strips away the anxiety of performance and encourages spontaneous, intuitive pleasure. just eating delicious morsels precisely when and only when your body actually asks for them.
It is a small, incredibly accessible way to begin loosening the psychological stranglehold of those 3 square meals.
But if you and I and everyone listening right now have had our internal ghrelin clocks trained by a rigid schedule for our entire lives, how do you, the listener, actually go about locating your real sensuous appetite when your brain has been trained by the clock for your entire life?
Well, it requires an active process of conscious unlearning. It means paying closer attention to subtle physical cues rather than looking at the clock on the wall.
Okay.
When you feel that sudden urge to eat, you have to pause and ask yourself a simple question. Am I actually physically experiencing hunger right now, or is it just noon?
Right.
Are my energy stores low, or is my brain just running the midday script? It's about actively tuning out the echo of the 19th century factory whistle and tuning back into the quiet signals of your own biology.
So what does this all mean? If we synthesize everything we've unpacked in this deep dive, the overriding takeaway is actually incredibly liberating.
It really is.
The 3-meal day is not a biological law of nature. It is a historical relic.
Yeah.
It was shaped by the Industrial Revolution to manage labor. It was co-opted by puritanical tycoons to sell cereal and police our morality. And it eventually mutated into a domestic pressure cooker that makes us feel like we are failing at life if we don't have a perfectly balanced dinner plated at exactly 6 o'clock.
And the practical application of that knowledge, for you listening, is grace.
Yes.
Grace.
The next time you feel a pang of guilt because you decided to skip a traditional meal, or because you made a meal out of some really good cheese and crackers at 3 in the afternoon, let that guilt go. You aren't failing.
No.
You are simply listening to your body's natural, ancient rhythms instead of adhering to an arbitrary schedule designed to optimize a 19th century textile loom.
Reclaiming your eating habits, even if it's just by enjoying a spontaneous afternoon snack without a shred of guilt, is a tiny, delicious act of rebellion against the factory clock.
I love that.
But mapping all of this out does leave me with one final kind of mind-bending thought to chew on. If the demands of the Industrial Revolution were powerful enough to completely rewire our daily biological cues and create the concept of lunch, how might our current era change us?
Oh, that's a great question. Right. We are rapidly moving into an age of remote work, artificial intelligence, and completely asynchronous living where time zones hardly matter. How is this new landscape going to permanently rewire human biology next? Will the rigid concept of a sit-down meal even exist a century from now? Or are we just going to naturally evolve back into a highly efficient society of perpetual, intuitive grazers?
It is a brilliant question to ponder the next time you hear that midday rumble and find yourself wandering toward the fridge.
If nothing else, the next time you look up at that clock and see the hands hit 12 noon, ask yourself who is really telling you to eat. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the everyday things, stay curious, and we will catch you next time.